Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today's the 19th of August. This is day 6 of the NorCal lightning bust. And this video is about how things are unfolding on the lightning bust. Got some forecasts, and we're going to look at yesterday's fire behavior. So we're going to jump right into overview of yesterday and some forecasts, and then we'll go to live maps of best information we have at the moment. If you're just joining us, we do fire intelligence videos here. We talk about the context of large fire management, some of the politics, history of fire in this area, and just try to give you kind of a broad education into how wildland fire works, both firefighting, fire behavior, fire ecology. We're user supported, so if you like this stuff, consider becoming a subscriber on PayPal, and we'll have a link down here of how you can do that. It really helps us keep the lights on. So starting off, we're going to look at yesterday's weather. We had afternoon thunderstorms that moved in. You can see building up here. Another loop here. You can see smoke in the northwest kind of lifting out ahead of the thunderstorms. Pilot fire was active through the day because we had less of an inversion where it is on a ridge. But you can see the smoke kind of in the morning laying over the other fires. And then the afternoon thunderstorms kind of pushing them out. In northeastern California, this is the northern Sierra, Katy Ridge. Yesterday we had, in the afternoon, pretty good thunderstorms move through and quite a bit of moisture. This is looking out kind of over Westwood and Mountain Meadows, and you can just see that there's a really dynamic afternoon in the northern Sierra, but with quite a bit of moisture. In fire behavior, you can see the pilot fire here was active through the day. You can see the clouds kind of build. And let's go back there real quick. Also, you can see up here the SRF, the Smith River Complex, was active in the afternoon. And a little bit of action on the head fire. As we've been saying, the pilot fire was active throughout the day, so this is just some video of the pilot fire doing its thing. Overnight, stayed pretty active. There were some storms that did move through. And then also you can see overnight that on this infrared that fires were fairly active in northwestern California overnight. We didn't see a lot of, sometimes we really see them become subdued, but there was quite a bit of heat through the night up there. So the forecast for today is going to continue to have some fairly high temperatures, higher than yesterday. RHs are staying fairly low. It's going to be unstable atmosphere, but we're not expecting to have a lot of large-scale winds, except outflows from thunderstorms. There is a thunderstorm forecast for this afternoon for the Scott Valley and western Klamath. We're supposed to have better humidity recovery tonight, and then tomorrow it's going to be cooler with southwest winds. Moving into the passage of Hillary, not a lot of high winds forecast for Northern California, at least not from the east. We're going to see that it stays fairly unstable. You can see in here, we've got this low off the coast, and then we've got the massive low of the hurricane coming up. We've got a ridge of really high pressure over kind of the interior southwest that's kind of pushing this storm, Hillary, up around itself. And so as Hillary passes up here through Nevada, and this low is still in the play, we're going to have a lot of instability in the atmosphere, potentially a lot more thunderstorms, but right now, no forecast for big east winds. The winds are forecast to begin to move a little from the north and northwest as these storms move through. All right, so jumping into the heat mapping, we've got some decent perimeters now from the crews that are out managing these fires on some of these fires. Some still aren't. There's a lot of fires going on, and the overhead, there's not enough overhead to go around. So don't have great mapping on some of the smaller fires, but the larger fires have started to kind of collect some decent perimeter data. And then also we have the satellite heat data that we use every day. Just to orient you, down here is Redding, Mount Shasta, Ashland, Wairika, Scott Bar. This is Highway 96, cuts over from down the Klamath River. Down here is Orleans, Willow Creek. And then we've got Arcata, Highway 299 through Weaverville back to Redding. Our fires, we're going to go in counterclockwise direction. We've got the deep fire here, the head fire. All these fires in here are being managed as the Klamath complex. This is the Smith River complex on the Six Rivers. We got the SRF complex here, the fires on the Six Rivers National Forest. Got a new fire here in over by Oric that we haven't covered yet. Down here is the Lone Pine Fire near Hoopa. We got the Perch Fire that's perched right above Orleans. And down here we've got the Pilot and fire formerly known as the 3-9 Fire that are burning near Hyam Palm, kind of west of the South Fork of the Trinity River. So we'll start with deep. We've got Weaverville down here, Trinity Lake, and then this fire is actually burning mainly in the wilderness. This green line is the Trinity Alps Wilderness. So there's no roads in the wilderness for the most part, but there is a trail along here. And the strategy on this fire has been to keep the fire uphill the trail. And it looks so far that's been successful. Here the fire is backing down towards the trail. And oftentimes when that happens, firefighters are going to help it back down, either through getting up on the hill and drawing lines on the ground with drip torches, or shooting incendiary rounds up in there, or sometimes using drones to slowly bring the fire down. We call that keeping it squared up. But generally, you don't want one part of the fire to come down faster than the other, because it makes it hard to kind of. The goal here is to bring the fire down to the trail in a controlled fashion. At times, in desperate measures, people might light off the bottom, fire the whole trail. We don't like doing that if we can help it, because fire running up the hill is destructive. If we can back the fire down, it's a lot more like a prescribed fire. And so that's been the strategy here, bring the fire down the trail. So far it's working. Here we see this heat that's slopped over the trail, and these heat satellites are not very accurate, especially in steep canyon country. So we wouldn't go out on a limb here and say that the fire has slopped over the trail. If it has, it's unfortunate, because it opens up kind of a whole new ball game. But we don't have any confirmation that that's actually happened. And so that's where we're at with that. Outside the wilderness here, there's some work putting in dozer lines on some of these roads to have a place to fight it as it comes out of the wilderness. Right now, there's not showing much heat on the uphill side, the up canyon side. We don't really know. We don't have any sort of information on what if there's any sort of suppression action happening on this up canyon side of the fire or not. So that's the deep fire. We're going to jump out here and head north up to Etna, Scott Valley, where we've got the head fire. As we mentioned yesterday, we don't have a whole lot of intelligence on these small fires that are burning. This fire here is in the wilderness, but as you leave down the Scott River Road, we haven't seen a lot of spread on these fires that are on top of the hill. And as we mentioned yesterday, in general, it's much better when a fire starts on top of the hill and has to back down than when it starts at the bottom of the hill and can run up with terrain. So just for reference, these small fires here that we've been talking about are the Gold, Scott, Block, and Townsend fire. Block and Townsend aren't showing really any heat at all, but Gold and Scott have remained active. So the Scott fire made a pretty good run yesterday. We've been watching it in this drainage. It's been hung up in this drainage for almost since the beginning of the fire, so almost 3 days. And we've been wondering what it would take for it to pop out of there. Yesterday morning we said, hey, it's been really moist overnight. It's going to take some drying for this to go. And so yesterday afternoon it did go. As far as we know, it hasn't crossed Mill Creek Road, but it did make a hard run to the top of this ridge between Franklin Gulch and Mill Creek. And like I said, we don't have, the teams are kind of struggling to get good, accurate mapping because the National Infrared Operations Plane has been out of service all week. So we haven't had any infrared from the National Infrared Program, but we have had some perimeters flown by FIRIS, which is California OES. So that white line is a FIRIS perimeter. Elsewhere here, we've got satellite heat scattered out here away from the fire, and we don't really know what's going on there. If that's errant data or if that's firing operations. But what we do know is that as you get to the top of this drainage, this all burned last year in a 2022 McKinney line. So there's old lines that can easily be opened up from that fire, but also as far as access, but also just that this fire on this side is basically already contained by McKinney. So right now we're not really informed on what the strategy is out in this part of the fire. Heat satellites aren't showing really any growth over here on this fire, which is the den fire. So popping out of there, we're going to come over here towards Happy Camp. There's no fires right near Happy Camp right now, which is fine because Happy Camp's had more than their share of fires. But as you come downstream from Happy Camp towards Cottage Grove, we've got the Elliott and Canyon fires, which have remained really active. This fire doesn't have a name right on top of it. We've got the U, Fish, and Malone fires. I'm not sure what this one in particular is being called. As we mentioned before, and we're going to just turn on the layers here, one thing that's really a little bit unique about the Klamath is just that we've had so much fire history here that these fires are all burning within a matrix of recently burned lands. So, for example, this fire here is burning in an area that last burned in 1987, but then it's wrapped by the 2021 McCash fire, the 2014 Frying Pan fire. There was another one in there, but I can't see it right now. Anyway, so what we come back to is we got McCash here. This fire is not going to burn stuff that burned 2 years ago in this environment. These fires over here are spreading up towards areas that haven't burned for 15 years. But the whole Klamath is what we call just this real puzzle piece mix of burn scars, and so you get a real variety of fire effects from these fires when they reburn. So coming down here from Somes Bar, we're coming down to the Perch Fire. The Perch Fire is definitely kind of concerning. I'm going to turn off the fire history for a minute because all these red blots get a little confusing. The Perch Fire, some good work going on over here. I saw on Facebook some friends of ours over there are organizing some mutual aid work. We've got the Perch Creek neighborhood right at the bottom of the hill here. A lot of people living in this canyon, and just a steep, inaccessible canyon above that is burned 17 years ago. And just what we know in this country is that there's nothing that anyone's going to do to hold this fire on this ridge line, or if you ever go over there on foot, you'll just see why that there's not a lot of control options. So this fire is going to back down into the Perch Creek neighborhood. So there's the whole neighborhood's out there right now with chainsaws and weed eaters, and they're doing what they can to improve conditions. The tough thing about all this river corridor living is that people live on these small parcels at the bottom of hills, and the land above is owned by the Forest Service. And so we can burn in people's yards and we can clean up on their yards, but it's really hairy when you come here and you light a prescribed fire right at the base of this slope. When the Forest Service land right up slope hasn't been treated, because you've just got that potential that if your prescribed fire gets away, it's going to go to the top of the mountain. It's going to become a season-long campaign fire. And so what the locals are doing here in Orleans is really trying to focus on fireproofing their communities, because they know that the only tool to manage the backcountry here is to let fires burn. And they also know that once fires are ignited here, that really we have a hard time putting them out, and that they usually burn all season anyway. So if there's a community in California that is more on top of their surroundings and has more experience with large fires than Orleans and Salmon River, I've yet to be there. I wanted to take a little aside here and talk just about complexes, right? We got the SRF complex here, which is all these fires out in here. We've got the Klamath complex that's over here. We've got the Smith River complex. It's up here. And the thing that's going on with each of these complexes is each one of them has an overhead team. Overhead teams are pre-built kind of groups of highly trained folks that come out to manage complex incidents. And I kind of spent my whole career working as a contractor on these teams doing GIS mapping. And so there's kind of funny things that come up when you have, I wouldn't say they're funny, but the word complex is fitting because right now we've got 3 complexes, 2 different national forests, 2 different ranger districts. And command teams really, in a lot of ways, they're just kind of they're babysitting fires that are unstoppable. They're steering them as they can. They're implementing strategies maybe to burn off a certain ridge. Maybe they've got a plan that's going to take 10 days to execute. For a fire like this one that likely is going to burn up in the wilderness. The plan could be there could be crews right now prepping this ridge. There could be crews out here prepping a ridge out here for an operation that may take place a week or 10 days from now. But what happens is these teams time out after 2 weeks. And so one thing that's of great frustration to folks in Orleans, I was out there in 2008 when we had something like 4 or 5 different command teams in this geography of the larger kind of 6 rivers in Klamath. And so every 2 weeks you get a new team, and that team may be coming from Georgia, or they may be coming from Colorado, or they may be coming from the Northern Rockies. And they may have never been in the Salmon River country. The Northern California teams, they've been here their whole careers. Some of them joke that they should just get a mailbox in Happy Camp because they spend so much time here. And those folks know the geography, they know the locals, they know the politics. And over time, they've learned the hard way how to deal with the locals. But you get a team that comes in from Georgia or sometimes even Southern California that doesn't know how things work around here. And they start implementing a strategy that the locals know won't work. And so we run into that. We were here in 2008, kind of after the complexes had all been burning for about a month. And they were starting to kind of combine them. So little things like data management can make a big difference. You come in and you're suddenly taking on all the mapping for 30 fires, and they're in a different folder. They're in a different file structure than what you're used to. It's gotten better now because everything's being centralized kind of through the internet. But in the past, you get there, someone hands you a CD and they say like, hey, your team's taking over these 10 fires. And you don't know what, the person who was there before may have had their own way of naming things. And so as kind of a geek coming in to try to bring some order to the chaos of these fires, once you get to this landscape scale where you've got all these command teams, it kind of becomes this just administrative exercise. And that's really frustrating for the locals in Orleans who see a team come in and say like, oh, we're going to put a line down this ridge and we're going to fire that. And then the locals say, they tried that in 1987. They tried that in 1996. They tried that in 2004. They tried it in 2006. It didn't work any of those years. And you're going to try it again and you're going to fail. And in some places, sometimes the locals just get kicked out. The locals are pretty good at like getting brought in as resource advisors or, liaisons. But in the past, sometimes those guys would just get sent home because the team coming in didn't want to hear these kind of raggedy local folks come in and tell them that their plan was, full of it. So over time, one thing that's evolved in this country that's it's pretty awesome is this community liaison program where we've got some really fire fluent locals that can come and they can talk to the team, they can communicate, they can kind of bridge the gap. Because you've also, in this area, had this crazy overlay of pot culture, massive influx of outsiders to grow huge amounts of marijuana. You've got native people that have lived here for thousands of years who know all about how fire works in this landscape. And so you've already got the conflict between the native people, the locals, and then everyone can hate on the Forest Service one way or another. But then in other ways, they're friends, right? So, and there's locals who work for the Forest Service. So there's just been this crazy kind of social fabric here that's kind of unlike any other place. But one thing that is really going on is that the locals here are extremely fire fluent. Locals are putting fire on the ground at scale and have a vision of how they're going to live with fire here. So there's a lot of lessons coming out here. A lot of you have probably seen stuff coming out of like Wichipec and how the Yurok, some of the women, the tribal leaders with fire in the Yurok are really bringing back cultural fire. So fascinating place to work, and that's all going on in the background here of the feds kind of parachuting in a bunch of teams, not literally, to try to make some order to this chaos. And then on top of that, you've got kind of the locals who already have are springing into action to take care of their own stuff. All right, another interesting thing going on here on the SRF complex is one thing that came out of my rant the other day about forest carbon in fire-prone landscapes is someone on Twitter gave me a link to a data set of all the forest carbon offsets in the country. And so you've got the Yurok project here, which is kind of one of the first big forest carbon projects and kind of a poster child for how forest carbon and forest conservation can work. You got that kind of right, a mile and a half from this fire here, 4 miles from this fire. And in this country, we worry a lot about big east wind events in the fall. And so it's not out of the question that we could get a big east wind on these fires here that would just smoke this big carbon offset project. Interesting article came out in the last year about how the forest carbon market works. And basically what it works is if you want to get paid to not log your land for a while and grow carbon, you have to put some money in this insurance pool. So basically 20% of all these projects, if you have 10,000 acres of carbon, you can sell 8,000 acres into the carbon credit program, but you got to reserve 2,000 acres for everyone to kind of be able to buy out of if this gets burned by a wildfire. So basically they found that 95% of the carbon offset insurance pool had been used in like the first 10 years of this 100-year program. So blowing a big fire through something like this could kind of clear out the rest of the insurance market that exists for forest carbon. So just thought it was interesting, and it's something that we'll be watching. Okay, so we're going to make our way. We're going to come in closer, look at this mosquito fire. Continues to spread here. We, in that the teams aren't yet sharing a lot of real detailed mapping, we don't really have a good idea of what the strategy is here, where lines are being built, how it's unfolding tactically. As these fires go on, more of that information starts to filter out, and we'll have more to talk about on the tactical level. For now, we're just, staying focused on the big picture. And like the big picture here, as we mentioned yesterday, is that these fires are occurring in a landscape that's been heavily altered over the last 100 years. All these white areas are places that we either had clear cuts or other types of logging. And we've got this pretty out of whack. We haven't had natural fire here for 100 years in a lot of places. And we've had this huge kind of intervention in the form of logging. Just as we mentioned, when you look at the whole Klamath, this side we just had a ton of fire, and the puzzle is pretty intact. There's little pieces that haven't had fire for a long time. But when you get over here, either you have areas that burned in like the 1920s, or you have areas that haven't burned at all. So it's concerning definitely to the locals to be living at the bottom of the hill in a place where you've got an entire, probably 100,000 acre landscape that really the fuels, there's not a lot of discontinuity. As you get farther north, we've had more fire. So, but like we say, this land, fire compartmentalizes it, and this is a particularly large compartment. Coming up here into the green, these fires are in the wilderness. Doesn't mean they won't be fought. It just means that you're probably not going to have dozers driving around in there, and even if you could bring dozers in administratively, doesn't mean that you'd necessarily gain much tactically from that. Okay, so bopping up here to Smith River. A lot of fire spread yesterday on these fires. We haven't seen much spread at all, really. We haven't seen significant spread in this area here in the Biscuit fire burn. And as we mentioned, I think, one of those reasons is that we've had fairly heavy humidity recoveries at night, and we've had heavy smoke laying in here. And so that suppresses the fire behavior, especially in these areas of light fuels. But the fires have grown aggressively in areas outside of Biscuit with not a lot of fire history. So this red mapping is from the team that's on the fire, and then the infrared is kind of a little behind that. But you can also see here we've had significant spread on we've got the Kelly Lower and Cedar, and I'm not sure exactly what they're calling this polygon here now. But you see that we've got significant spread down canyon towards Gasky in the last 24 hours. All right. Um, over here by Oric, there's a new fire that we haven't talked about yet called the Lost Fire. That looks active on the heat satellites. We don't really have any information on that yet. If we come up with some, we'll post it on our Twitter. Hopping over here to Lone Pine Fire here by Hoopa. Still no real updated mapping there. Showing some heat down by the river. Looks like it's cooling off on this flank. And as we said yesterday, there's completed line around this side of the fire and back down. Okay, so we're going to finish off here by looking at these fires that are near High and Palm, the Pilot Fire. We don't know if this 3-9 fire is still being called, if it's being called the Pilot or not. This one on the webcams we showed, it spread actively yesterday. It's still slope influenced, meaning that it started on top of the hill and it's backing its way down. So we're not seeing big kind of landscape scale slope driven runs. And as we mentioned before, this 3-9 fire is in an area that burned in 2015. All this area in blue burned in 2015. So still active, it's like we said before, it's one of the fires that being up on a ridge, it's kind of spared from the big smoke influence. So you can see it's kind of between Highway 36 and Burnt Ranch. And it's burning on South Fork Mountain, which, little trivia for y'all geographers out there, South Fork Mountain is the longest continuous mountain ridge, at least in California, if not longer. It goes all the way from over here by Red Bluff, almost all the way to the coast. Anyway, lots of fires in Northern California. We don't really have any new information on any of the fires that are in northeastern California, except that we're not hearing much about them. And the ranch fire, I think, is fairly well buttoned up. But don't hold me to that. I just don't have a lot of information. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. We're not going to be doing a broadcast tomorrow. But unless something really crazy happens, which we hope doesn't. Except, there's a hurricane that's going to hit California, but whatever. Good luck, everyone. And thanks for your interest.